Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning,
Hello, hello.
depending on where you all are in the world. Welcome. We will just give it a moment for people to join. We're all bang on 4 o'clock at the moment here in Munich. So we'll give it a little bit just for people to trickle in, coming out from their previous meetings. I hope everybody is having a fab day. The sun is out in Munich today after heavy rain yesterday and a lot of snow at the weekend. So we've had all the extremes of weather over the last few days.
Yeah, we've been hit pretty hard up here in New Jersey. We had about 2 feet of snow.
Oh, I saw the news with the storms. Wow.
Yeah, it's been pretty rough. I think I'm pretty done with it at this point.
I hope you're all doing all right. Well, yeah, I hope you're all doing all right. I will give it a moment more just to give the final people, hopefully a few more people a chance to arrive. Expecting more. So we're ready to go shortly. Hello to those who've just joined. We're just going to give it right 3 minutes past now. Let's make a start. I think I'm expecting more people. We can catch them up quickly. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to February's Squalify webinar. We will be talking today topic of steering cyber risk across entities and how to win budget approval faster. We've got 45 minutes. As we go through, we will have time for questions. If you would like to leave a question, please use either the Q&A function on Teams or the chat function. We've got Ria joining us as well, who can help answer the questions in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on it as well while we're presenting, and we can answer those. If you would rather speak your question aloud, there's time at the end to do that. But we'll try and kind of pick up the questions at the right time as we go through to go through things. So, welcome. I am Douglas Needham. I am the head of the consulting team here at Squalify. So I'm responsible for our project delivery and our model development. My background is 15 years of various information security roles, but 2 years recently here at Squalify on the kind of the vendor side of the table rather than the internal side of the table. I'm joined with my colleague Yash. Would you like to introduce yourself, Yash, very quickly?
Yeah, thanks, Douglas. Hi, everyone. My name is Yash Bajaj. I'm a pre-sales and account executive here at Squalify. I started my professional career in the US in management consulting, and I've worked in sales for the past 4 years about. And I'm responsible for doing all the demos of our platform. So I'll be very happy to show you all what our Squalify platform looks like in a bit. And thanks so much for joining today.
Cool. Thanks, Yash. Thank you all for joining as well. So when we had the registration, we had a couple of pulse check questions there. So we like to feed this back just so that everybody on the call has got a feel for They're not alone in the world of security and how everyone else is working in this place at the moment. So we looked at cyber risk across an enterprise and comparing risks about how does that happen. So from the respondents, and we had around 30 respondents, so not everybody has managed to make the call, sadly, but this is more than just the people who are with us right now. So about 20% of people have a kind of cross-enterprise approach that they're using here. The other 80% not standardized, and of those, some of them are not kind of sure about how they have this visibility. And how does that reflect on budgeting? So we're here today to talk about a cyber risk quantification tool and platform. Only 10% of people on the call will be are already using quantification and using that in their budget requests. Others not yet doing that, but using other assessment methods, whether it is qualitative risk assessments, non-financial scenarios, these kind of things. So this kind of reflects a lot of our customer base as well. It is, I think, still early days for cyber risk quantification, so it's great that you can join us to learn a little bit more about it today. What are we going to talk about? I'm going to talk very briefly to sort of set the scene, talk about what I see as the challenges and what our customers see as the challenges for managing risks across an enterprise. Then I'm going to hand over to Yash, who's going to spend the bulk of this session demoing what Squalify can offer. So we'll get into a bit of detail about how we answer the challenges, really. We've got time at the end for takeaways and questions. I'll wrap up very quickly, but we'll hopefully have more time for questions. As I said, any questions, do write them in the chat, do write them in the Q&A function. Ria and myself will be keeping an eye on that and responding as we go through. If I could ask you as well to mute your microphones through the majority of the presentation, that just means that we don't have the background noise coming in. So, challenges. What are the difficulties in an enterprise? And I guess I'll start with what do I mean by enterprise. So we're talking here about companies that span perhaps multiple territories, multiple industries. These are perhaps large groups, conglomerates, corporations, where there may be a headquarter function, then a regional team who run operational security or security for, I don't know, Europe versus the United States versus Latin America versus the Middle East. And there may be different industries even within a group. So you may have part of your enterprise where one part of that company is manufacturing something, another part distributes it. There may be some kind of financial services helping there for financing of purchases, those kind of things. And these different realities of a company have different perspectives for risk. So different regions may be subject to different cyber threats. Different industries might be targeted differently. There will be different regulations in different parts of the world. And as is natural in a very international environment, there are different behaviors, different expectations, different ways of working. So this means that understanding the risk and seeing a risk can be very different in different parts of the world. And in particular, what does that mean as a challenge for as a CISO or a security professional? Understanding across that enterprise what your biggest risks are can be very difficult. We saw from the questionnaire that not many organizations have sort of standardized frameworks for this across the enterprise. Taking into account how that local business works, the regulatory environments, the business model, the size, the customers, the suppliers, that complicates things, and comparing that is a challenge. And kind of touching on both of those two topics there, comparing those, whether it is aggregating a group-wide view to see what are your risks from a top level, or comparing risks in one part of the world to another, to one business line to another, can be very challenging. And this all then feeds into the decision making at a strategic level about where to invest. Quite often there will be shared technology services across a group, which kind of raises the watermark for a company and helps improve the security in all areas. But quite often the governance approach, I've seen examples where there is local delegation for budget decisions. So one country may be able to invest in their own strategic priorities, but perhaps as a global CISO, you want to be able to understand how that's happening and steer that to see, are there synergies? Are there bigger risks that perhaps global investment can be answering? So hopefully this has wet the whistle a bit. Perhaps you've kind of picked up on things that might be relevant for you. This is introducing our topic of risk steering, and I'm going to hand over to Yash now, who is going to give you a bit more detail about how does Squalify assess that risk, quantify the risk, make comparisons, and help with budget making decisions. So I will stop my sharing and hand over to Yash. He will then
Thanks, Douglas.
take you further.
Thanks, Douglas. Let me know when you all can see my screen.
I can see your screen.
Perfect. Great. Then I will walk you all through the Squalify platform. Before I get into the topic of subsidiary steering and budget approval, I want to set the context a little bit and just make sure that you all understand exactly what Squalify does. So as Douglas mentioned, of course, we are a cyber risk quantification platform. We are a SaaS platform, and we are 100% venture of Munich Re. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Munich Re, it is the world's largest reinsurance company and was one of the world's first companies to actually cover cyber losses in their model. And so we are using Munich Re's cyber underwriting model to quantify our results and to provide the metrics that we provide in our tool and in our platform. So what does that really mean? Before I touch on the outputs here and walk you through really what we offer, just to briefly understand what the inputs are required in our platform, we have three main sections. So we have, we ask you for some basic company information. So things like where your company is headquartered, what industry do you operate in, what is your profit, and what is your revenue, how many employees do you have, things like that. And then we'll ask you some questions, what we call our consequence scenarios. So we really focus on what are the consequences that would occur as a result of a cyber attack. So we have three main consequences, which would be a business interruption scenario, a data privacy breach scenario, or a financial theft and fraud scenario. So we'll ask you some questions related to those. And then the last piece, it would be a self-reported information security maturity assessment, which you would report based on some controls. Ours are based on the NIST framework. And we could map in any framework, and that would really be what would be required from an input perspective to then get to these outputs. We would conduct, our platform conducts a lot of Monte Carlo simulations in the back end, and this is how we get to the results, which I'll walk you through right now. So before I go into kind of the subsidiary steering view, I think it's important to just take a step back and talk about one entity and what we can offer in terms of quantifying for one entity. And so here you'll see a few metrics. So the first one that we have is the worst case loss. Right now we are in a demo environment for a manufacturing company based in the US. So the worst case loss for this company is $638 million. What does that really mean? It is a worst case scenario. If all information security measures were to fail, what would that look like? What would be the potential financial loss from if all information security measures were to fail? So we know that that's highly unlikely, but we think it's important to kind of create a sense of responsibility and set the context. Next, we have expected large loss. This is more of a probabilistic value coming from our insurance background. You may also know it as value at risk. So we look at what is the potential loss in a specific recurrence period, could be 100 years, 200 years, or 1%, 0.5% probability. But I think this really sets the scene for something a bit more realistic and on the ground, which is the expected average loss. So this company is at risk of losing $53 million on average every 7 years, or about 14.5% probability. So if we divide, that 53 by 7, that's around a $7.6 million annual expected loss. And for this company, I talked about the 3 consequence scenarios: business interruption, data privacy breach, and financial theft and fraud. And for this specific company, business interruption would be their biggest risk. So this is just to kind of set the scene for the kinds of outputs that we can provide. And for one entity, of course, we can go into a little bit more detail here, but I want to focus today on the subsidiary steering and the budget approval view. So this is what the subsidiary steering view would look like. So when we have a subsidiary steering situation, right, there may be, as Douglas mentioned, multinational, these large enterprise corporations where they have multiple different business entities, different subsidiaries. So you could imagine this in different ways. It could be, subsidiaries in different companies or different geographic areas. You could also think about it in terms of different business units or different business functions within the organization. So there are different use cases, but the idea here is the same, right? It might be a large company that has a group level target, and they're trying to understand what the different risks are at their subsidiary or their smaller entity level. And so you could quantify with the Squalify platform the different subsidiaries or the different entities individually and understand all of these different metrics that I talked about before for each of those. And so a lot of our competitors that are offering cyber risk quantification offer, this single entity view, but Squalify is enabling multi-entity view for companies that are trying to steer subsidiaries rather than just report, right? I think reporting can be the easy piece, but if you really want to steer, then you have to have a consistent risk language for all of the subsidiaries or for all of the entities. And so Squalify is enabling that. And so you can see here for this company, for this large manufacturing company based in the US, as part of our demo case, there are 3 subsidiaries. There is a Mexico subsidiary, a USA subsidiary, and a German subsidiary. So you could see here for each subsidiary what the overall exposure level is, what their overall maturity is. The risk balance here is looking at how does the company's exposure level relate to its information security maturity. So based on that, we assign it a score from 1 to 4. And so you can see here how the risk balance value is different for each of the subsidiaries. And you can also see, you can also see some of the other metrics that I talked about. So what the worst case loss would be for each of the subsidiaries, the overall 200-year modeled large loss, or what the largest 200-year modeled large loss would be, what the overall 100-year modeled large loss would be, and then also thinking about the overall modeled average loss. So, 24 million every 6 years, or 22 million every 6 years, and so on and so forth. And so you can understand how each of these subsidiaries compare in terms of their different risk profiles by comparing these different metrics. So something that I want to highlight here is also the insights. What is the real takeaway from all this information? So for this specific case, right, we are showing how the different subsidiaries are exposed based on their risk profiles, and this just evaluating the information in front of us, right? We can see that subsidiary Mexico would need the most attention because it has a very low information security maturity of 31%, which does not fit the medium to high exposure for that specific subsidiary. And so from the financial risk metrics, we can see that the company's Mexican subsidiary contributes a significant risk share to the group level. And so then their overall 200-year expected large loss of 143 million for subsidiary Mexico is the highest of all top 3 subsidiaries. So you can take this information and then based on that, decide what the action plan would be to steer these different subsidiaries in the direction that you would like for the group level target. We also have some other views enabled. So you could see, over time, how these subsidiaries have changed. So you could see, the group level compared to the different subsidiaries in terms of their risk balance, how they're changing over time. So in the first half of 2024, second half of 2024, first half of 2025, second half of 2025. So you can see how the different subsidiaries are changing over time in comparison to the group level as well. And you can then make decisions based off this. So you can understand perhaps there may be some topics here related to acquisition of a different company or investment in different areas of information security. But basically, the takeaway here overall is that the current maturity level still needs improvement to meet the company's group level target or the ambition, which is shown here. And you could see, how to steer each of the subsidiaries individually to achieve the group level target. So the status quo risk balance is 3.0, and the 2-year target is 2.2. And so to do that, you would want to see, if you assume that all the entities are growing at similar rates in the next 2 years, which means that their exposure would stay the same, then you would need to achieve differing levels of maturity to reach the same risk balance target for each subsidiary, of course, considering that they're at different postures. And so based on this risk-based approach, the least protected entities would need to invest more in security maturity. So Mexico, for example, here would need to invest more than Germany or USA, for example, to reach the same target. So these are just some examples. Yep.
Sorry, go back to the circles picture, Yash. So just as a reminder, so the risk balance, this is the balance between the exposure, which kind of reflects the size of the company, the business model, the geography, and the security maturity. So a lower risk balance score is a better balance. And so going from 3 to 2.2 is improving it. But this takes into account those differences in the threat landscape, in the size of the company, and everything else. In this chart as well, the size of the circle shows the potential losses. So we can see, as a consequence of the lower maturity, but also the exposure, that has the biggest circle for the Mexico subsidiary, and that has the largest quantified losses as well. Back to you, Yash. Sorry for jumping in.
Thanks, Douglas. No, absolutely. Please jump in. So that's a high-level picture of subsidiary steering and what we can offer. Now I want to bring this back to budget approval. And so now thinking about going back to one specific entity, we can talk about budget approval in terms of there may be different options of how you could reach strategic targets within the organization, and there are different paths that you can take. One of the very unique things, and I think one of the best features that Squalify offers, is the ability to simulate, right? So potentially, even if you're looking at a one single entity view, or you're looking at a multiple entity view where we're looking at a bunch of different subsidiaries side by side, you can conduct different simulations within the platform, which will allow you to change any of the inputs that you've put in from the status quo and simulate how that would impact the financial loss value. So one example of this could be improving the maturity level of certain controls. So you may improve on certain controls. You may also change some of the information in the consequence scenarios, right? So year over year or over time, certain aspects may change, or you may want to simulate a different scenario, perhaps a scenario that hasn't occurred yet, or a scenario you might think, okay, well, this is something that may happen in terms of something that we're looking at, which could be potentially very disruptive. And so let's simulate and see what the actual financial repercussions of that could be. Also, year over year, as Douglas just mentioned, the risk landscape and just the overall exposure change over time, right? There's natural growth of the company, the number of employees increases, the number of the revenue and the profit also increases year over year, I would hope, right? So in that case, you can simulate different things over time. And so one very great thing that you can do with Squalify is you can, simulate the different options that there would be to reach the company's strategic targets. And so there could be 3 different simulations, for example, for the manufacturing group. One could be, related to the NIS2 regulation and trying to focus on controls that are, explicit to NIS2. There could be one simulation, for example, where you're trying to achieve zero trust in a certain part of the organization. And so that's something that we have listed here. And then one could be, trying to improve 10 information security controls that are shown to have the highest impact. And so that's something else that Squalify can offer you is based on all the information that you've inputted on your organization, we will tell you the top 10 controls ranked from 1 to 10 that would have the highest impact on reducing the financial loss values. And so if you wanted to increase or raise the maturity level of those specific controls, what would that really do? And so what you see here is you see the number of controls that have been changed, right? So you would input, based on the specific path you take, we would know how many controls have been changed. Then you as an organization would tell us what the planned budget for that change would be, or for those changes would be. And then Squalify will tell you what the actual risk reduction amount would be from those changes. So from the controls that have been changed, what is the actual risk reduction that is coming? And so based on the planned budget that you've told us and the risk reduction that Squalify has told you, we can calculate a return on security investment. And based on that information, then decide which is the best option or the course of action to take to reach our strategic targets. And so you can see here with these 3 simulations, of course, the first one, the NIS2 program, has the highest return on security investment and thus would be the best path forward to reach our strategic targets. And you can see here on this chart where we're mapping the exposure to the information security. We have the different consequence scenarios here. So BI means business interruption. I'll focus on that one. And you can see how this T1 could be the strategic target for the organization, but already the simulation is bringing the business interruption closer to the strategic target in the sense that we're moving from this left dark blue status quo business interruption to being closer to this light blue BI business interruption, which is after the simulation, which has already brought us closer to our strategic target. And just to clarify the return on security investment and how exactly this is calculated, we use it's calculated by looking at the monetary risk reduction minus the cost of investment, and then dividing that by the cost of investment. So that's how we got this 120% here for this. And so the risk reduction here for this organization, we use it calculating the 0.5% value at risk or 100 years and the expected large loss figures. And so the corresponding simulated absolute risk reduction for this organization is $44 million based on the above control improvements. And so, like we said, with the planned investment of 20 million, that's where the 44 million is coming from. And with the planned investment of 20 million, this would result in a very high return on security investment of 100%. I also want to touch quickly on some other views that Squalify could help with. So just thinking about, how the current expected cyber loss potential fits into the company's risk appetite. One thing that, is really important to mention here is really the main use case or the value proposition of Squalify is really, putting these complex cyber topics and cyber metrics in financial metrics that would make sense to an audience like the board, a CFO, a CEO, so non-information security professionals. I think that's one thing that we've seen is that as Douglas was mentioning, kind of introducing the problem, it's hard for enterprises to manage their different risks, but also it's hard to communicate this kind of information to non-information security professionals or people who don't understand a lot of these technical topics and terms. And so what we're really doing is putting that financial metric. So, the main thing that these stakeholders care about, right, is the bottom line. And so putting this information into, dollars or euros really helps communicate that. And I think, just thinking from a macro perspective, if you want to understand how the current expected cyber loss potential fits into the company's overall risk appetite, I think that's then bringing this to a much higher level and really thinking about, cyber from a very strategic company-wide perspective. And so, something that you could perhaps, use with Squalify is also then thinking about, what the company's risk reporting thresholds would be, for example. And so here, just want to show, the statistical overall large loss of 335 million at a probability of 0.5% or a 200-year recurrence period. And the 200-year recurrence period is really what many companies use to set their risk appetites. And so if you see this 335 million, statistical overall large loss, it's 12% above this company's risk limit, which is defined by the board of management, or $300 million. And so because this risk is beyond the defined risk tolerance, and it was approved in the first half of 2025 to be acceptable for a limited time of 2 years, we've developed a 2-year cyber strategy with the goal to reduce our overall expected large loss below the risk threshold of 300 million. So that's just an example of how these insights could then be used to bring this conversation to more of a higher strategic level. I'll stop here looking at the clock. Douglas, anything else you want to add before we open it up for questions?
I think just to touch a little bit around the process again. So you described it at the beginning and went through it. What we're showing here are the outputs and the results of a quantification. So to get to this stage, we have our quantification methodology, and this has the 3 sets of inputs that Yash spoke about. So one is kind of company, basic company information. This is the kind of stuff that describes the structure of a company, the geography it works in, the industry, the number of employees. Typically, that's pretty readily available. If you're a public company, it will be the stuff from a financial report, the annual financial reports. The second topic that we need information around is the security maturity. We have our default kind of framework that we work with is the NIST cybersecurity framework. So we would go through that set of controls, take maturity scores for that, and include those. How do we then put that into the context of your company? This is where the scenarios and the scenario definition comes in, and that's really important. So for each of the 3 categories of scenarios, the business interruption, the data privacy breach, and the financial theft and fraud, you can define what those scenarios look like for you. So if you are a manufacturing company, as this demo case is, a business interruption may look like a stop of production. It may be the kind of the Jaguar Land Rover type case where for a number of weeks production is halted and you have to go through. We have for each of those scenario categories a set of questions which then help prompt to get the right financial inputs that we need for the platform. All of those go into the platform. All of the mathematics is taken care of. That is in the back end. That is all automated. And then very quickly then from all the inputs, you get the outputs and the calculations. So that's how it works again. I think now we will pause for questions, and I can see there's one in the chat already, so I'll answer that one in a second. If people want to raise a question, if you'd like to write it out, either write it in the chat or in the Q&A window. If you would like to just speak it and ask it, please raise the hand through Teams and we'll come to you through that. So in the chat, there is a question from Chris Henney. Thank you, Chris. How do you take into account the degree of personnel training on cyber? So, as I mentioned, the security framework that we use, the NIST CSF, this has a couple of questions regarding training and awareness. So we would then look at how is the training and awareness implemented within that company. We have some guidelines for how that would be then rated and scored, and then that would feed in from as just one part of the overall security assessment there. I will pause for any more questions. I can see there is typing as well in the chat happening. So another question, how are you modeling it statistically for a specific industry, in particular maritime transport? So one of the differentiating factors of Squalify is that our heritage is from the cyber insurance industry. So we have spawned from the Munich Re reinsurance company, who have 10 years worth of cyber insurance underwriting and claims data across many industries and many different sizes and geographies of companies. So this data set, we believe, is probably the biggest cyber claims thing in the world. We can't compare it because there are other private ones as well, but it's certainly substantial. From this, we can see which industries and how much data are available for that. I would need to double check maritime transport specifically, but that is the process that we would go through. We would validate how much data is available, how many previous companies have been assessed through this, relevant claims, that kind of thing. And then all of that data feeds into things such as the frequency modeling for particular industries and geographies there. So we base it on the historic claims data of Munich Re, and I would need to check specifically for industries, but that's our approach. I will pause for one more moment. If anybody would like to ask any more questions, then either please type it or raise your hand. Otherwise, I will get ready to wrap up. Okay. We have gone through this very quickly. We have had 40 minutes with you. Thank you very much for being generous with your time on this Wednesday afternoon. If I wrap up, I will say, I think we can probably all agree that steering cyber risk is difficult. One of the things that we want to emphasize as well is that in a multi-entity environment, it's not just the security maturity that is important, but it is the business model, the size, and the threat environment of those companies. We take all of that into account, and this is important to distinguish between different types of company. Making comparisons and steering at this top level, you need to be working from the same language, and the risk language that we are using and bringing is the financial language here with quantified risk assessments. And Yash has given the very quick demo of the different features and reporting outcomes that we can talk about. So comparing within one entity, the different scenarios to see how significant they are relative to each other, and then also across an enterprise between different entities as well. We've talked about how you can then simulate improvements to security and how that affects your risk. So modeling the risk and the potential losses on a status quo basis, simulating improvements that are planned and showing how those losses then reduce. We find this is very powerful for risk conversations, and we would hope you do too. I will wrap up by thanking you all again for joining us. Thank you to Yash for the demo. Thank you to Ria for helping with the organization. We've done the questions and answers. If you would like to get in touch, please do reach out. Please visit our website for more details. We are very happy to have a more tailored conversation, to have a more tailored demo and answer any specific questions that you might have for your needs, use cases, and quantification goals. So thank you very much. One final time from me. I hope you have a very enjoyable rest of the day. Hopefully see you again soon. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.